Boys and girls, guess what day it is? Anybody? Anybody? Ha! Okay, you know how I am about hump day. Okay, there's Paco. He's come to join us today for story time. Okay. Um, all right, let's remember. We're on chapter 2, the city of Ember. All right, all right. We had Dune and Lina yesterday. Dune got the job of messenger. He didn't want it. He thinks that's just sharing gossip. Lina got the job in the pipe works, which is below Ember. Now, Ember is already below the earth. So then you go below into the pipe works, and that's where the river runs. And the river is what runs the generator that gives them electricity. And Dune wants to figure out where electricity comes from and how the generator works, because the generator is what's keeping the lights on and the electricity in Ember. Remember what we learned yesterday. Ember was built by the builders to last 200 years. Okay, and it's been about 243, 246, 245 years. They don't know exactly how many. But everything has gotten old. They're running out of everything. They're running out of food. They're running out of the light bulbs because the builders put everything down in the storerooms that they were going to need for 200 years only. And they've gone over that time. So Ember is really getting bad. But somehow the mayor in this story, he's going to be the sneaky one. Somehow the mayor seems to have everything he needs. And somehow the mayor is not worried about anything. And he makes it a crime if you try to leave Ember. He wants nobody to try to leave Ember because he wants you to kind of be brainwashed into thinking that everything is great, but it's really not. Okay, so you go to school until you're how old? 12, and then you get your job. So our two main characters got their job yesterday, and it says you keep your job for 3 years. If you do great at it, fine. If you don't, then you get put in a different job. And there are kind of yucky jobs like the pipe works, and like being street sweepers and trash sifters and mold scrapers. Now the better jobs are being the messenger, like the greenhouse helper and the electrician's helper, and things like that. So here we go, chapter 2. Lina often took different routes between school and home. Sometimes, just for variety, she'd go all the way around Spark Swallow Square, or way up by the shoe repair shops on Livery Street. But today, she took the shortest route because she was, hold on, boys and girls, you know I'm going to make a mistake every time, because she was eager to get home and tell her news. She ran fast and easily through the streets of Ember. Every corner, every alley, every building was familiar to her. She always knew where she was, though most streets looked more or less the same. All of them were lined with old two-story buildings. The wood of their window frames and doors hung long unpainted. On the street level were shops. Above the shops were apartments where people lived. Every building at the place where the wall met the roof was equipped with a row of floodlights, big cone-shaped lamps that cast a strong yellow glare. Stone walls, lighted windows, lumpy, sorry boys and girls, sorry, lumpy muffled shapes of people. Lina flew by them. Her slender legs felt immensely strong, like the wood of a bow that flexes in springs. She darted around obstacles, broken furniture left for the trash heaps or for scavengers, stoves and refrigerators that were past repair, peddlers sitting on the pavement with their wares spread out around them. Peddlers, people that sell their goods on the street. She leapt over cracks and potholes. When she came to Hafter Street, she slowed a little. This street was deep in shadow. Now, what would deep in shadow mean? Well, to us, it would mean it's probably dusk because it's getting dark. But remember, Ember is underground, okay? They've never seen the sun. They've never seen trees, birds. They don't know any of outside life like we know. So in Ember, when it's under the ground and it's called deep in shadow, that pretty much means that the lamps are out or the light bulbs are going dim. 4 of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lina thought of the rumor that she had heard about light bulbs, that some kinds were completely gone. She was used to shortages of things, everyone was, but not of light bulbs. If the bulbs for the street lamps ran out, the only lights would be inside the buildings. What would happen then? How could people find their way through the streets in the dark? Somewhere inside her, a black worm of dread stirred. She thought about Dune's outburst in class. Could things really be as bad as he said? She didn't want to believe it. She pushed the thought away. As she turned onto Boodlow Street, she sped up again. She passed a line of customers waiting to get into the vegetable market, their shopping bags draped over their arms. At the corner of Oliver Street, she dodged a group of washers trudging, there's that word again, trudging, along with bags of laundry, and some movers carrying away a broken table. She passed a street sweeper shoving dust around with his broom. I am so lucky, she thought, to have the job I want. And because of Dune Harrow, of all people. When they were younger, Lina and Dune had been friends. Together they had explored the back alleys and dimly lit edges of the city. But in their 4th year of school, they had begun to grow apart. It started one day during the hour of free time, when the children in their class were playing on the front steps of the school. "I can go down 3 steps at a time," someone would boast. "I can hop down on 1 foot," someone else would say. The others would chime in. "I can do a handstand against the pillar. I can leapfrog over the trash can." As soon as one child did something, all the rest would do it too, to prove they could. Lina could do it all, even when the dares got wilder. She yelled out the wildest one of all, "I can climb the light pole." For a second, everyone just stared at her. But Lina dashed across the street, took off her shoes and socks, and wrapped herself around the cold metal of the pole. Pushing with her bare feet, she inched upward. She didn't get very far before she lost her grip and fell back down. The children laughed, and so did she. "Well, I didn't say I would climb to the top," she explained. "I just said I'd climb it." The others swarmed forward to try. Lizzie wouldn't take off her socks. Her feet were too cold, she said, so she kept sliding back. Forward Penny wasn't strong enough to get more than a foot off the ground. Next came Dune. He took his shoes and socks off and placed them neatly at the front foot of the pole. That tells you something about Dune, too. Then he announced in his serious way, "I'm going to the top." He clasped the pole and started upward, pushing with his feet, his knees sticking out to the sides. He pulled himself upward, pushed again. He was higher now than Lina had been. But suddenly his hand slid, and he came plummeting down. He landed on his bottom, with his legs poking up in the air. Lina laughed. She shouldn't have. He might have been hurt, but he looked so funny that she couldn't help it. He wasn't hurt. He could have jumped up, grinned, and walked away. But Dune didn't take things lightly. When he heard Lina and others laughing, his face darkened. His temper rose in him like hot water. His temper rose in him like hot water. Simile. "Don't you dare laugh at me," he said to Lina. "I did better than you did. That was a stupid idea anyway. A stupid, stupid idea to climb that pole." And as he was shouting, red in the face, their teacher, Mrs. Polster, came out onto the steps and saw him. She took him by the shirt collar to the school director's office, where he got a scolding, a talking to, he didn't think he deserved. After that, Lina and Dune barely looked at each other when they passed in the hallway. At first, it was because they were fuming about what had happened. Doon didn't like being laughed at. Lina didn't like being shouted at. After a while, the memory of the light pole incident faded, but by then they had got out of the habit of friendship. By the time they were 12, they knew each other only as classmates. Lina was friends with Vendy Chance, Orly Gordon, and most of all, red-haired Lizzie Biscoe, who could run almost as fast as Lina and could talk 3 times faster. Now, as Lina sped toward home, she felt immensely grateful to Doon and hoped he had come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd be friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouses. Clary waved to her and called out, "What job?" And Lina called back, "Messenger," and ran on. Lina lived in Quilliam Square, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm a messenger!" Granny's shop had once been a tidy place, where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in the cubby holes that lined the walls. All the yarn and thread came from old clothes that had gotten too shabby to be worn. Granny unraveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into balls and thread into spools, and people bought them to use in making clothes. These days the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangled out of the cubby holes, and the browns and the grays and the purples were mixed in with the ochres and the olive greens and the dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend half an hour unsnarling the rust red yarn from the mud brown, or trying to fish out the end of a thread from a tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days she just dozed behind the counter in her rocking chair. That's where she was when Lina burst in with her news. Lina saw that Granny had forgotten to knot up her hair that morning. It was standing out from her head in a wild white frizz. Granny stood up, looking puzzled. "You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But Granny, today was assignment day, and I got my job and I'm a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up, and she slapped her hand down on the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger. That's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lina's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and round brown eyes. At the top of her head was a sprig of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lina's knees. "Wina, Wina," she said. Lina bent over and took the child's hands. "Poppy, your big sister got a job. Are you happy, Poppy? Are you proud of me?" Poppy said something that sounded like, "Hoppy, hoppy, hoppy." Lina laughed, hoisted her up, and danced with her around the shop. Lina loved her little sister so much that it was like an ache under her ribs. Simile, an ache under her ribs. That means she loved her so much it almost hurt. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coughing sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother, giving birth to Poppy, had died too. Lina missed her parents with an ache that was as strong as what she felt for Poppy, only it was a hollow feeling instead of a full one. "When do you start?" asked Granny. "Tomorrow," said Lina. "I report to the messenger station at 8 o'clock. "You'll be a famous messenger," said Granny. "Fast and famous." Taking Poppy with her, Lina went out of the shop and climbed the stairs to their apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that had belonged to Lina's parents, her grandparents, and even their grandparents. Remember that. They're in the same apartment where Lina's parents, her grandparents, and their great-grandparents lived. You're going to need that later on. Old, broken, cracked, threadbare. Threadbare. That means the thread is almost just worn out. Things that have been patched and repaired dozens or hundreds of times. People in Ember rarely threw anything away. They made the best possible use of what they had. In Lina's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft but uneven underfoot. Against one wall squatted a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs. And on the couch were blankets and pillows, so many that you had to toss some on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood two wobbly tables that held a clutter of plates and bottles, cups and bowls, unmatching forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of string wound up in untidy wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the floor, and 2 short ones that stood on tables. And in uneven lines up near the ceiling were hooks that held coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans, jars with unreadable labels, and boxes of buttons and pins and tags. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. Now listen to what a thing of beauty is to them. A label from a can of peaches. So they would undo the label and hang up that picture as a picture because that was art to them. Remember, they've been down here, this generation, and not these people, because this is fantasy, but these people still live a normal span of life. So, of course, these aren't the same people that started the city of Ember. This is a couple of generations down. A few dried yellow squash flowers, a strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings, too. Lina had done the drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked somewhat like Ember, except that its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lina retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures. Over and over she had drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as seen from afar. Sometimes she chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put in stairways and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small, and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which the people of the city greeted her when she arrived, the first person they had ever seen to come from elsewhere. They argued with each other about who should be the first to invite her home. Lina could see this city so clearly in her mind, she almost believed it, that it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though. The book of the city of Ember, which all children studied in school, taught otherwise. So this is kind of how they brainwash them. So here's a quote from the book. "The city of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders," the book said. "It is the only light in the dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions." That's what they want you to believe. That's what the mayor wants everybody to believe. Lina had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness, beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lina wanted the other city to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful, and it seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today, she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen, where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked and was used to store glasses and dishes so Poppy couldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a long row of cans. Lina tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could find what she wanted quickly. Now that's part of Arthur's craft right there. They didn't just say Lina was an organized person. Our Arthur didn't say that. Jean Dupro. I mispronounced her name yesterday. Jean Dupro. But she instead said she kept the cans in alphabetical order. That tells you that she is organized without saying she's organized. And then see, that adds a detail to the story. But Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled baby drink and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into a cup and carrots into a little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. You see, they save everything. Did you notice what she just saved? The liquid. She'll do something with the liquid, like when you drain a can of vegetables. A lot of times I pour that down the sink. They save it and use it. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For the moment, Lina felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, she would be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Poppy's chin. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lina arrived the next morning, she was greeted by Messenger Captain Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said Captain Fleary to the other messengers. A cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lina. "I have your jacket right here," said the captain. He handed Lina a red jacket like the one all messengers wore. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep, reverberating bong. 8 o'clock, cried Captain Fleary. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations!" As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lina. "Your station," she said, "is Garn Square." Lina nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lina nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4, the captain went on. Deliver a message only to the person that it's meant for, no one else. Lina nodded again. She bounced on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleary smiled. "Go," she said, and Lina was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. Sure-footed means you're agile. Athletes are sure-footed. They're not clumsy. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the window of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long, dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in their black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came into Garn Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer. It was old Natty Preen, calling her from the bench where he always sat. "This goes to Ravenet Parsons, 18 Silverton Square," he said. Bend down. She bent down so that her ear was close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broke. Don't come for dinner." "Repeat." Lina repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Preen. He gave Lina 20 cents, and she ran across the city to Silverton Square. There she found Rave Nat Parsons also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. "Oh, that old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't feel like cooking." No reply. Lina ran back to Garn Square, passing a group of believers on the way. Notice how they capitalize the word believers. It's a proper noun. This is a group of people in the city that also, like the mayor, kind of try to brainwash you. And they're always singing songs about how wonderful Ember is and how safe they are and how things are doing great, of which they really aren't. Lina ran back to Garn Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lina that there were more believers than ever these days. Now, what they believed in, she didn't know, but it must make them happy because they were always smiling. Her next customer turned out to be Mrs. Polster, the teacher of the 4th year class. In Mrs. Polster's class, they memorized passages from the book of the city of Ember every week. Mrs. Polster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. "What you need to learn, children," she always said in her resonant, precise voice, "is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference," here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence, "you must always choose the right." In every situation, Miss Polster knew what the right choice was. Now here was Mrs. Polster again, looming over Lina and pronouncing her message. "To Anisette Lefron, 39 Hum Street, as follows," she said. "My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last." Please repeat. It took Lina 3 tries to get this right. "Uh-oh, a red dot for me," she said. Mrs. Polster did not seem to find this amusing. Lina had 19 customers that first morning. Can you do 19 times 20 real quick in your head? 19 times 2, 38. Add a 0. $3.80 she made for her first day. 20 cents a message, remember. Some of them had ordinary messages, like, "I can't come on Tuesday. Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Please come fix my front door." Others had messages that made no sense at all, like Mrs. Polster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know, and hidden alleyways and little rooms in the backs of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Felina Tower had the skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. "I study it," she said when she saw Lina staring. "I have to know how people are put together." At a house on Carew Street, Lina delivered a message to a weird-looking man, whose living room was completely dark. "I'm saving on light bulbs," the man said. And when Lena took a message to the Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days the back room was used as a meeting place for people who like to converse about great subjects. Notice that's capitalized. Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time? She heard someone ask. Perhaps, answered someone else. There was a long silence. And then again, perhaps not. All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out, and she loved running. And even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her. You're going to want to remember this. Walking with a sort of sideways lurch. And remember this. He walked with a lurch. That's kind of like a limp, and he kind of pushed to a side. He was an odd-looking person. He had a very long neck with a bump in the middle and teeth so big they looked as if they were trying to escape from his mouth. His teeth looked so big they looked like they were trying to escape from his mouth. Figurative language, starts with a P. Miss McCord's favorite. Personification. Yes. People try to escape. Teeth don't try to escape.